Well, back when the steam locomotives were replaced with diesels, they were very common. Like when the trains go by today, we're going to see all these different colored locomotives, all the different railroads, and we even hardly turn our head to even look over there because they're very commonplace. Steam locomotives were the same way. So railroad enthusiasts, people that like railroad history, and people that like steam locomotives really thought that steam locomotives were special, and they asked the Union Pacific if they would donate one of those big boys. Well, the Union Pacific very graciously did, and they picked the 4014 out of a line of locomotives that was not going to be used anymore. They were going to scrap them and cut them up and melt down that steel for other things. Well, the 4014 was saved and it got sent to California, and there it sat until 2012 when we went and asked them if they would give it back to us.
My knowledge isn't exactly vast on the 4000 class, but what I can tell you is they were a successor to the Union Pacific's Challengers 4664 steam engines, and they were built during the 1940s to help with the war effort. They hauled such trains as the Pacific Fruit Express and armored trains and troop trains. After that, they were used on heavy hauling freights up Sherman Hill. And then eventually, throughout the 50s, one by one, they were all retired until eventually none were left. UP did have, at one point way back then, the idea to restore one of their big boys and use as tourist excursion. They, in fact, tested the idea with 844. You want to see inside the smoke box?
I got two of the big boys, 4013, 4015, Challenger.
I think that's as far as it'll go, unfortunately, but if you crook around there, you can see inside.
Then I go into my diesels. I got low pack.
Now, just to give you a sense of scale, the average human in this scale is about like that big, about as big as my finger. You can stand inside that. You don't have to duck. That's crazy.
I have a living room full of trains, so I love the Union Pacific Big Boy because it's not only the biggest train in the world, it has many world records.
My apprenticeship began 32 years ago, on steam locomotives, and I'll never forget those that mentored me. And that's what we do, is we mentor others. You can't see the work going on right now, but we've got some new staff over there that we're training, and it's a lifelong process of learning. A steam locomotive is a great teacher, but you have to be willing to learn, so you never get to a point to where you think you know everything, because you will be humbled very quickly.
I'm amazed of how big the wheels are and how big everything is about it, because even a 7-foot man is the size of a wheel on it.
There's a certain reverence that comes with the seat, the engineer's seat and the fireman's seat. So on our crew, only those that are qualified to fire the locomotive. And to be an engineer, you have to become a master fireman, because the engineer manages all aspects of what we call locomotive management. For those of you who are into railroad history, there's a whole correspondence course volume of books, and there's a volume or a chapter, actually an entire book, on what is known as locomotive management. That means that you've got to be able to sense any little issue, troubleshoot it, analyze it within seconds, and deal with it. And oftentimes it's your experience of having dealt with those problems that will just, another part of the day, a few moments will pass, or it's the difference between something becoming catastrophic. With a locomotive of this size and a train, this is a 1,300-ton train, 600 tons of locomotive. It's 100% functional, the brakes work very well, but we want to preserve all of our resources, but most importantly, this restoration. So that means that we got to run it properly, we have to fire it properly, and to your point, sir, that the reverence that comes with sitting in the engineer's seat, we're very disciplined about everything. We blow the whistle a lot, but we only blow it when we need to.
It's amazing. It's great for publicity for the Union Pacific. It's generally great for the public as well. And it gets people out of the house. I mean, we've, COVID going on and all that sort of stuff. it's great to have a nice breath of fresh air with this, and honestly, it's something that a lot of people didn't expect, but here it is.
Regarding the speed of the locomotive, I think that's part of the interest of faster than a speeding locomotive. It's neat to look over there and imagine that the locomotive has endless power and it'll just pull anything you put behind it. But it's a mechanism and it has its limitations. It was designed with a 68-inch diameter wheel. And for those of you that in your mind, you can kind of look over there and see what I'm talking about. But the main rod, which is the big rod that goes from the crosshead, which connects to the piston, that main rod is actually 3 inches longer than the main rod on the 844. The 844, we call it connected. Its main driver is the number 2. This is the number 3 and the number 6. And it's that way because of the angle, but it's all part of the design calculation for what the locomotive is designed to do and produce power. So generally speaking, when you've got a locomotive of that size, look at the counterweight. That's that big crescent moon part of that main driver. That's full of lead, and it has plates of steel welded to it to give it enough mass to counter the reciprocating mass of that driver and all of those rods that is moving. About 47 miles an hour, the engine starts shaking. And there's you'll go through those little imbalance ranges. About 50 miles an hour, it calms down. I've run the 844 at 75 miles an hour, but they're both 80-year-old locomotives and the components aren't new. So what they can do now versus what they could do back when they designed them is much differently. But a 68-inch driver was probably maximum of around 70 to 75. Over the years, people, when they write an article about the big boy, or somebody heard somebody tell them something that somebody ran you just kind of have to understand the mechanics of the design.
Cheese, look at mama. Woohoo, Landon. Cheese. All right, let's go. Ready? Come on, Bubba.
I just appreciate all y'all done, and I know you had a hot ride down through the Midwest because we've had really hot temperatures. But thank you, Ed, for all you've done.
So that's very kind of you, and we appreciate it very much. Standing behind us is a great railroad network and tens of thousands of people that are doing, for example, the event like this takes months of planning. All of our logistics, the guys working on the locomotive right now, this is part of a great team, and it's a privilege, it's an honor to be a part of it, so we appreciate that.